What's up, History Addicts? Today we're diving into a story so absolutely bonkers that it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. We're talking about an English queen who literally turned herself into a human poison factory, and no, this isn't some medieval myth or fairy tale gone wrong. This is documented, witnessed, and completely real. Picture Tudor England, but instead of just political intrigue and beheadings, imagine a royal court where the actual monarch could kill you just by bleeding on you. Yeah, we're going full horror movie today, folks. Grab your tea, settle in, and prepare to never look at makeup the same way again. So, let me introduce you to our star, a woman so obsessed with beauty standards that she basically became a walking, talking chemical weapon. And the wildest part? Everyone around her just went along with it. Our story kicks off in the opulent chambers of Richmond Palace, where what should have been a royal bedroom looked more like an alchemist's fever dream. Every morning, servants would wheel in trays containing enough toxic materials to kill a small village, and they called it a beauty routine. The queen's dressing table was essentially a poison buffet. White lid powder, mercury-based rouge, antimony for darkening eyebrows, and various arsenic compounds for that healthy glow. Her ladies-in-waiting had to wear special gloves and sometimes even primitive masks because the fumes alone could knock you flat. But here's the kicker. She didn't just slap this stuff on and call it a day. Oh no, she had developed an elaborate 2-hour ritual that involved layering these toxins, like she was creating some kind of deadly lasagna on her face. Every single morning at precisely 6 a.m., the queen would begin what her staff secretly called the morning death dance. She'd sit in her specially designed chair, which, fun fact, had to be replaced every few months because the toxic residue would literally eat through the wood and submit to her poisoning session. First came the base layer of ceruse, a delightful mixture of white lead and vinegar that would be painted on so thick you could probably carve initials into it. Then came the rouge made from cinnabar, which is basically mercury sulfide, the stuff that makes people go completely insane. The most disturbing part? She'd hum little tunes during this process, completely oblivious to the fact that she was essentially giving herself a daily dose of death. Her ladies-in-waiting would exchange terrified glances behind her back, but nobody dared to speak up. I mean, what are you gonna do? Tell the Queen of England that her beauty routine is literally killing her. After her makeup marathon, our poison queen would glide down to the Great Hall for breakfast, leaving a trail of metallic-smelling powder in her wake. But eating became a whole production because, surprise, surprise, when your face is coated in lead paint, you can't exactly chow down on a hearty English breakfast. She developed this bizarre eating technique where she'd use special silver spoons, because it would tarnish black if it touched anything too poisonous, which was basically everything she consumed. Her breakfast consisted mainly of liquids, watered-down wine, broths, and various health tonics that were probably just more poison in disguise. The kitchen staff had to prepare her food in separate pots because anything that touched her dishes would become contaminated. They literally had a queen's poison kitchen that was kept completely separate from where the normal people food was prepared. Imagine explaining that job description to your family. Now, if you think having one walking corpse queen was bad enough, wait until you hear about her court. See, in Tudor England, imitation was the sincerest form of not getting your head chopped off, so naturally all the noble ladies started copying her deadly beauty routine. Foreign ambassadors would write home, describing the English court as a gathering of beautiful ghosts and the most terrifying spectacle in all of Christendom. One Spanish diplomat famously wrote that attending an English court function was like dining with elegantly dressed corpses who insisted on making conversation. You'd think that after spending all day slowly poisoning herself, our queen might take a break at bedtime. Wrong. Her nighttime routine was somehow even more disturbing than her morning one. She slept with her makeup on. Yes, you heard that right, because removing it would reveal what she'd done to her actual face. Her bedroom was kept at freezing temperatures year-round because heat would cause her makeup to melt and run, creating what servants described as rivers of white death streaming down her face. She slept sitting almost upright in a specially designed chairbed contraption to prevent the toxic paste from smearing. The most horrifying detail? Her pillowcases had to be burned after each use, because they'd be so saturated with lead and mercury that they were classified as hazardous waste. Imagine being so toxic that your bedding becomes a public health hazard. As months turned into years, the physical effects of her daily poisoning routine became impossible to hide. Her hands developed a constant tremor that made signing royal documents an adventure in abstract art. Court scribes learned to interpret her increasingly erratic signatures, and important state papers started looking like they'd been signed during an earthquake. But the psychological effects were even worse. The mercury and lead cocktail she was mainlining daily began affecting her mind in ways that would make a modern psychiatrist weep. She'd fly into rages over the tiniest perceived slights, then dissolve into tears when a servant moved a candlestick 2 inches to the left. Her mood swings became so unpredictable that the court developed a color-coded warning system. If the queen was wearing her thickest makeup, it meant she was having a high-toxicity day, and everyone knew to walk on eggshells and speak in whispers. Here's where our story takes a turn from tragic to downright terrifying. As the toxins built up in her system, the queen's very touch became dangerous. Several court musicians fell mysteriously ill after she touched their instruments during performances. Her favorite lapdog died after she pet it for too long. The royal physicians, and yes, she had multiple doctors trying to figure out what was wrong with her, began keeping detailed records of anyone who had prolonged physical contact with the queen. The pattern was undeniable. People were getting sick just from being near her. One particularly brave or stupid court physician suggested that maybe, just maybe, her beauty routine might be related to all the mysterious illnesses, his reward. He was banished from court, and his medical license was revoked. Because apparently, telling the truth about the queen's toxic lifestyle was considered treason. Every evening, in the privacy of her chambers, our queen would perform the most heartbreaking ritual of all. She'd look at herself in her mirror without makeup. What she saw was the ghost of her former self. Patchy, gray-green skin, hair falling out in clumps, and eyes that had developed a strange, unfocused quality from mercury poisoning. But instead of stopping the madness, she'd just apply more makeup the next day. It was like watching someone try to fix a leak by adding more water. The worse her natural appearance became, the thicker the toxic layers grew, creating a vicious cycle that was slowly killing her from the inside out. Her personal diary from this period, which survived and is absolutely terrifying to read, contains entries like, "Applied extra cirrus today to cover the green patches and must remember to powder the scaling areas more thoroughly." She was literally documenting her own slow-motion suicide. The absolute peak of this madness came during a state dinner she hosted for visiting French nobility. Picture this, a grand banquet hall filled with the most important people in Europe, and at the head of the table sits a woman who's basically a walking chemical spill waiting to happen. During the meal, her makeup began to crack and flake into her food. Instead of being horrified, she just kept eating, consuming literal flakes of lead paint like they were seasoning. The French ambassador later wrote that watching the Queen of England eat her own makeup was the most disturbing spectacle I have ever witnessed. Oh wait, it gets worse. She insisted on personally serving wine to her guests, wine that became contaminated with lead residue from her hands. Several of the French delegation became violently ill that night, and diplomatic relations between England and France were strained for months, because everyone assumed it was an assassination attempt. By now, the English court had transformed into the world's most elaborate conspiracy to pretend everything was totally normal. Nobles developed an entire vocabulary of euphemisms to avoid acknowledging what was happening. They'd say the queen had divine luminescence instead of looks like a corpse, and ethereal fragility instead of is literally falling apart. The court physicians were forced to become creative fiction writers, inventing increasingly absurd explanations for her symptoms. Official medical records from this period read like fantasy novels. Her Majesty suffers from an excess of celestial humors, and the royal constitution is too pure for earthly ailments. One doctor actually wrote that her trembling hands were caused by an overabundance of divine energy. Meanwhile, foreign spies were having a field day. Intelligence reports sent back to other European courts described the English queen as either cursed by witchcraft or blessed with supernatural beauty that mortal flesh cannot contain. Nobody could figure out what was actually happening because the truth was too ridiculous to believe. Behind the scenes, the palace staff had formed what was essentially an underground resistance movement dedicated to keeping their employer alive despite her best efforts to kill herself. They developed elaborate protocols for handling anything that came into contact with the queen, including special disposal methods for contaminated items. The royal laundresses had the worst job in the palace. Her clothing had to be washed in separate tubs using special soaps. And even then, the garments would gradually deteriorate from the toxic residue. They went through dresses faster than a fashion influencer goes through sponsorship deals, and each discarded gown had to be burned like hazardous waste. But here's the really wild part. The servants started developing their own health problems from constant exposure to her toxic environment. Palace records show an unusually high rate of mysterious illnesses among staff, including hair loss, tremors, and what we now recognize as classic symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. They were literally sacrificing their own health to maintain the illusion that their queen wasn't slowly dissolving. Dr. William Hobbs, the queen's primary physician, kept private journals that were discovered centuries later, and they read like the diary of a man slowly losing his sanity. He documented every bizarre symptom, every failed treatment, and every increasingly desperate attempt to save his patient from herself. His notes reveal a man caught between medical ethics and royal politics. He knew exactly what was killing her, but suggesting she stop wearing makeup was apparently equivalent to suggesting she stop breathing. So instead, he tried treating lead poisoning with mercury treatments, mercury poisoning with arsenic compounds, and arsenic poisoning with more lead, creating a medical merry-go-round of death. The poor guy eventually started having nightmares about giant powder puffs chasing him through the palace corridors. His final journal entry, written shortly before he requested a transfer to literally anywhere else, simply reads, "I have stared into the abyss of vanity, and it has stared back with hollow, lead-painted eyes." As word spread through European courts about England's unusual monarch, diplomatic visits became increasingly awkward affairs. Foreign ambassadors would arrive expecting to meet the powerful Queen of England and instead found themselves face to face with what looked like a beautifully dressed skeleton with a crown. One particularly memorable incident involved the Venetian ambassador, who fainted during his first audience with the Queen. When he came to, he reportedly asked if he was being introduced to the Queen or her funeral effigy. The diplomatic incident that followed required months of careful negotiation to resolve. The Spanish court actually started sending their ambassadors to England, with special survival kits that included antidotes for various poisons, just in case. They'd heard rumors that the English queen was so toxic that she could kill people just by shaking hands, and honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. So what happened to our poisoned queen? Well, that's where history gets a bit fuzzy, because the official records were heavily sanitized by embarrassed court historians. What we do know is that she essentially vanished from public life, becoming a ghost story that haunted English palaces for generations. And here's the kicker that brings this whole insane story full circle. Modern analysis of surviving makeup containers from her era shows toxic levels that would be considered weapons-grade chemical hazards today. She didn't just turn her blood into poison. She created an entire culture of beautiful death that haunted English high society for generations. So the next time you complain about your beauty routine taking too long, just remember, at least it's not literally killing you, probably. Thanks for watching, history lovers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe appreciate that modern makeup won't turn you into a walking chemical weapon. See you next time.